The hammer struck frozen earth at 9:17 in the morning. February cold had locked the ground solid, and each blow sent vibrations up through the contractor's arms, through bone and muscle, until his teeth ached. He paused to breathe, vapor rising in front of his face, and looked down at what the blade of his excavator had just exposed. A door. Horizontal. Wooden. Buried 4 feet beneath what should have been virgin soil behind the Marsh property in Cooperstown, Pennsylvania. The door had a handle, rusted but intact, and carved into the wood, barely visible under decades of dirt, were 3 words: "Do not open." The Marsh family had owned the property since 1867. Records confirm this. The house itself was built in 1871, a modest 2-story structure typical of post-Civil War rural Pennsylvania, clapboard siding, narrow windows, a chimney that leaned slightly south as if trying to escape. The land had been farmland before that, part of a larger estate subdivided after the war. But no blueprints, no county records, no surveyor's map ever mentioned a basement entrance in the yard. And yet here it was, 4 feet down, sealed with a door that seemed to have been designed not to keep people out, but to keep something in. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to hear exists in the space between historical record and collective silence, and some truths only survive when people choose to remember them. The contractor's name was Dennis Ehrlich, 42 years old, married, father of 3. He had been hired by the current owners, a couple from Philadelphia who had inherited the Marsh house from a distant aunt, to level the backyard and install a patio. Simple work. Routine work. But when the excavator's blade caught the edge of that door, something in Dennis went cold. He would later tell investigators that the moment he saw the carved warning, he felt what he described as a change in air pressure, as though the ground itself had exhaled. He did not open the door. Instead, he called the property owners. They arrived within an hour, confused and curious. The husband, a man named Roger Tate, suggested they pry it open immediately. His wife, Lauren, was less certain. She stood back from the pit, arms crossed, staring at the door with an expression Dennis would describe as recognizing something she'd never seen before. In the end, they agreed to call the County Historical Society first. What they did not know, what no one could have known until the archives were searched, was that the Marsh family had a history. Not of violence, exactly, not of crime in the legal sense, but of silence, of things left unspoken, of rooms that were never entered and questions that were never asked. In 1899, a Marsh family daughter named Catherine disappeared. She was 14. No body was ever found. In 1923, a hired hand named Samuel Oakes vanished from the property. His belongings were discovered in the barn, untouched. He was never seen again. And in 1947, the last surviving Marsh, a woman named Edith, died alone in the house. Her will contained a single unusual clause. The land is to remain undisturbed. Let what is below remain below. The Historical Society sent an archivist named Dr. Miriam Ashford. She was 58, angular, precise in speech and movement. She had spent 30 years cataloging Pennsylvania's rural past, and she approached the excavation site with the calm of someone accustomed to the dead. But when she looked down at the door, her composure faltered. She knelt at the edge of the pit, brushed dirt from the carved letters, and went silent for nearly a minute. "This isn't a root cellar," she said finally. "Root cellars don't have warnings." She recommended they open it under controlled conditions. Document everything. Bring a structural engineer to ensure the integrity of whatever lay beneath. Notify local authorities in case human remains were involved. Roger Tate, impatient and skeptical, asked why they needed such precautions for what was probably just an old storage space. Dr. Ashford looked at him. "Because someone went to great effort to make sure this was never opened, and people don't do that without reason." 3 days later, on February 11th, 1998, a team assembled at the site. Dennis Ehrlich, Dr. Ashford, 2 county officials, a structural engineer named Paul Wren, and a local sheriff's deputy named Jack Calloway, present as a legal formality. The day was overcast, windless, oppressively still. The kind of weather that makes sound carry farther than it should. Paul Wren examined the door first. He noted that it was constructed from old-growth oak, unusually thick, nearly 3 inches, and reinforced with iron bands that had oxidized into the wood itself. The hinges were on the underside, meaning the door opened downward into the earth. He also noted something else. The door frame was sealed with a black, tar-like substance that he could not immediately identify. "This wasn't meant to rot," he said. "Whoever built this wanted it to last." They decided to proceed. Dennis and Paul used crowbars to pry the door open. It resisted. The tar-like seal cracked with a sound like breaking bone, and a smell emerged from below. Not decay exactly, but something older. Mineral. Stagnant air that had not moved in generations. The door finally gave, groaning on its ancient hinges, and swung downward into darkness. A set of stone steps led down. 12 steps, steep and narrow, descending into a chamber that none of them could yet see. Dr. Ashford shone a flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed rough stone walls, a low ceiling, and at the bottom of the stairs, a dirt floor. No furniture, no shelves, no signs of storage or habitation. But in the center of the floor, there was something. A chair. Wooden, high-backed, facing the stairs. And on the chair, carved into the backrest in letters deep enough to catch shadow, were 3 names: Catherine Marsh, Samuel Oakes, Edith Marsh. No one spoke. Dr. Ashford descended first. Her flashlight beam swept the chamber. It was approximately 10 feet by 10 feet, walls made of fieldstone mortared with lime. The ceiling was barely 6 feet high. There were no other doors, no windows, no ventilation. The air was cold and dry, preserved by the seal above. The chair sat in the exact center of the room. It was old, handmade, constructed with the same care as the door. The wood was smooth, almost polished, as if it had been touched many times. Dr. Ashford moved closer, shining her light on the carved names. Beneath each name was a date: Catherine Marsh, 1899, Samuel Oakes, 1923, Edith Marsh, 1947. The dates matched: the disappearance, the vanishing, the death. Paul Wren, who had followed her down, noticed something else. On the floor, surrounding the chair in a perfect circle, were small objects. He crouched down to examine them. Buttons. Dozens of buttons, each one different. Bone, brass, wood, shell. Some were old 19th century designs, others were more recent. They had been arranged deliberately, evenly spaced, forming a boundary that had not been disturbed. "Why buttons?" Paul whispered. Dr. Ashford did not answer. She was staring at the chair, at the way it faced the stairs, at the way the names had been carved not as a memorial, but as a list. Deputy Calloway descended last. He was a practical man, not given to superstition, but even he felt the wrongness of the space. He turned slowly, scanning the walls with his flashlight. That was when he saw them. Scratches, hundreds of them. Thin, frantic lines scored into the stone, concentrated near the base of the walls. They were not random. They formed patterns, repetitions, the same shapes over and over, as if someone had been trying to write something but could not form the words. "Jesus Christ," Calloway muttered. Dr. Ashford moved to the wall, tracing the scratches with her fingertips. "These were made by hand," she said softly. "No tools, just fingernails." Dennis, still standing at the top of the stairs, called down, "What's in there?" No one answered him. Paul Wren stood and walked the perimeter of the room. He was methodical, documenting, measuring, but his hands were shaking. He reached the far wall and stopped. There, at eye level, was a single sentence scratched into the stone. The letters were crude, uneven, written with immense effort. "It hears when you say the names." Dr. Ashford read it aloud. Her voice, steady until now, cracked on the final word. They stood in silence. The air in the chamber seemed to contract, as if the walls were listening. And then, from somewhere below them, from beneath the dirt floor, they heard it. A sound, low, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Deputy Calloway drew his flashlight upward, scanning the ceiling, the corners, searching for a source. "That's groundwater," he said. though his voice betrayed doubt. Or settling. But Dr. Ashford knew better. She had spent her life among the ruins of the past, and she understood when a place was marked by more than history. She looked at the chair, at the carved names, at the buttons arranged in their unbroken circle. "We need to leave," she said. They climbed the stairs quickly, Paul and Calloway first, then Dr. Ashford. Dennis helped pull them up, and together they stood at the edge of the pit, breathing hard, staring down at the open door. "What do we do?" Roger Tate asked. He had been watching from a distance, and now his curiosity had turned to unease. Dr. Ashford did not hesitate. "We seal it, immediately, and we do not speak the names again." The door was resealed that same afternoon. Paul Wren oversaw the work personally, using industrial adhesive and 2 layers of plywood bolted over the original door before the pit was filled in. He worked in silence, and when the last shovel of earth was tamped down, he stood over the site for a long moment, as if committing it to memory. "That should hold," he said. But no one believed him. Dr. Ashford returned to the County Historical Society and locked herself in the archives. She did not leave for 3 days. What she found was a history that had been carefully obscured, written in the gaps between official records, tax documents that listed structures never described, estate inventories that mentioned locked rooms never photographed, letters that referenced the space below without explanation. The Marsh family had been unremarkable in almost every way. They were farmers, tradespeople, members of the local church. But beginning in 1867, the year they acquired the property, a pattern emerged. Every 20 to 30 years, someone connected to the Marsh family vanished. Not violently, not suspiciously. They simply ceased to be. Catherine Marsh disappeared in 1899. She was last seen walking toward the barn at dusk. Her father reported her missing the following morning, but the search was brief. The county sheriff noted in his report that the family did not seem distressed in the manner expected. Samuel Oakes vanished in 1923. He had been hired to repair the roof. His tools were found in the yard, his coat hung on a nail in the barn, his pay left untouched in an envelope on the kitchen table. The family told investigators he had likely moved on. No one pressed further. Edith Marsh died in 1947, alone in the house. She was 73. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the county coroner noted something unusual in his private journal, an entry Dr. Ashford discovered buried in a file box marked Miss 1940s. He wrote, "Edith's hands were raw, fingertips worn to bone. Cause unknown. Family declined autopsy." Dr. Ashford sat in the dim light of the archive room, reading and rereading that sentence. Fingertips worn to bone. She thought of the scratches on the stone walls, the frantic repetition, the shapes that almost formed words. She thought of the chair and the names and the buttons arranged in a perfect circle. And then she found the letter. It was tucked inside an estate file from 1948, written by a lawyer named Morton Fisk, who had handled Edith Marsh's will. The letter was addressed to the Pennsylvania Historical Commission, and it read, "To whom it may concern, I write to document an unusual request made by my client, Miss Edith Marsh, in the final weeks of her life. Miss Marsh insisted that a clause be added to her will, stipulating that the property at 1247 Old Miller Road remain undisturbed in perpetuity. When I asked for clarification, she became agitated and stated that the ground must not be opened, as there are things beneath that do not sleep as we do. I include this letter not as a legal matter, but as a historical curiosity. Miss Marsh was of sound mind at the time, but her phrasing was unusual, and I feel it merits preservation." Dr. Ashford made copies of everything. She returned to her office, locked the door, and began to write a report, but halfway through, she stopped. Her hands were shaking. She realized that if she published what she had found, people would ask questions. They would want to excavate further. They would want to investigate. And something in her, some instinct older than reason, told her that this was exactly what should not happen. She burned the report that night. Meanwhile, at the Marsh property, things were beginning to change. Roger and Lauren Tate had moved into the house while renovations continued. They were practical people, city-raised, skeptical of superstition. The incident with the buried door had unsettled them, but they attributed it to historical oddity, nothing more. The door was sealed. The ground was level. Work on the patio would resume in the spring. But Lauren began to notice things. Small things at first. The basement door, the one inside the house leading to the actual basement, would not stay closed. She would latch it before bed, and by morning it would be open, the latch undone. She mentioned it to Roger, who checked the frame and found nothing wrong. He installed a deadbolt. The door still opened. Then there were the sounds. At night, when the house was silent, Lauren would hear something beneath the floor. Not footsteps, not scratching. Something closer to a voice, low and indistinct, as if someone were speaking in another room. She would wake Roger, and they would listen together, but the moment they focused on it, the sound would stop. "Old houses settle," Roger said. "Pipes expand and contract. It's normal." But Lauren knew the difference between a house settling and a house responding. On March 3, 1998, she went into the basement during the day. She had been avoiding it since they moved in, but she needed to check the water heater. The basement was unfinished. Stone walls, dirt floor, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. She descended the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand, and immediately felt the cold. It was the same cold she had felt standing over the buried door. She moved through the basement, checking the heater, the breaker box, the old shelves stacked with paint cans and tools left by previous owners. And then, in the far corner, she saw it. A patch of dirt that looked freshly disturbed. She approached slowly. The dirt was loose, mounded slightly, as if something had been digging from below. She crouched down, shining her light on the surface, and saw what looked like the outline of fingers pressed into the soil. Lauren left the basement immediately. She did not tell Roger. She did not call anyone. She simply went upstairs, locked the basement door, and sat in the kitchen until he came home. That night she dreamed. She was standing in the backyard in the dark, looking down at the place where the door had been buried. The ground was open again, the door exposed, and she could see the stairs leading down. She did not want to descend, but in the dream, her body moved without her consent. She walked down the stairs step by step until she stood in the chamber. The chair was still there, but now it was occupied. A figure sat in the chair, facing away from her. It was tall, thin, draped in something dark. She could not see its face, but she could hear it breathing. And then, slowly, it began to turn. Lauren woke before it completed the turn. She was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Roger was asleep beside her, undisturbed. She looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. She got out of bed and went to the window. Outside, in the pale light of a waning moon, she could see the backyard. The place where the door had been was smooth, undisturbed, but she could have sworn, just for a moment, that she saw someone standing there. The next morning, Lauren called Dr. Ashford. They met at a diner in town. Dr. Ashford arrived with a folder of documents, her expression grave. She listened as Lauren described the sounds, the basement, the dream. When Lauren finished, Dr. Ashford was silent for a long time. "You need to leave that house," she said finally. "Why?" "Because the Marsh family didn't bury a door. They buried a threshold, and thresholds are meant to be respected." Lauren stared at her. "You think something is down there." Dr. Ashford chose her words carefully. "I think the Marsh family believed something was down there, and I think they were right." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of the letters, the coroner's note, the estate documents, and at the bottom, a photograph. It was old, black and white, dated 1899. It showed the Marsh house, newly built, with the family standing in front. There were 5 people in the photograph: a man, a woman, 2 boys, and a girl. The girl was young, perhaps 14. She stood slightly apart from the others, her expression blank, her hands clasped in front of her. "That's Catherine," Dr. Ashford said. She disappeared 3 weeks after this photograph was taken. Lauren studied the image, and then she noticed something. In the background, just visible through one of the windows on the first floor, there was a face, pale, indistinct, watching from inside the house. "Did you see that?" Lauren whispered. Dr. Ashford nodded. "I've been looking at that photograph for 2 weeks. I still don't know what it is." Lauren closed the folder. Her hands were trembling. "What do we do?" "You leave. You sell the property. You never go back." "And if we don't?" Dr. Ashford met her eyes. "Then you'll end up like them. And one day, someone will find your name carved into that chair." Lauren told Roger everything that night. He listened, skeptical at first, then silent. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. "You want us to leave because of a dream and some old letters?" "I want us to leave because something is wrong with this place." Roger sighed. "Lauren, I know the door was strange. I know the house makes noises. But we've put money into this. We can't just walk away." "We can. We won't." That was the end of the conversation. But it was not the end of the disturbances. Over the next 2 weeks, the activity intensified. The basement door began opening multiple times per night, the deadbolt sliding back with a soft click that woke Lauren every time. Roger installed a security camera aimed at the door. When they reviewed the footage, they saw the bolt moving on its own, slowly, deliberately, as if invisible fingers were turning it. Roger called a locksmith, then an electrician, then a home inspector. None of them found an explanation. The locksmith noted that the bolt mechanism was functioning perfectly. The electrician found no magnetic interference. The inspector simply said, "Old houses do strange things." But Lauren knew this was not a malfunction. She started researching the property herself, visiting the county clerk's office, the library, the local historical society. She found references to the Marsh family scattered across decades of records, birth certificates, property deeds, church registries. But there were gaps, whole years where the family seemed to vanish from public record, only to reappear later with no explanation. And then she found the newspaper article. It was published in the Cooperstown Ledger on October 14, 1899. The headline read, "Local Girl Missing, Search Continues." The article was brief, noting that Catherine Marsh, age 14, had disappeared from her family's farm. Her father, William Marsh, told authorities she had gone to fetch water from the well and never returned. A search party combed the surrounding woods for 3 days. No trace of her was found. But there was a second article published a week later that Lauren almost missed. It was tucked into the corner of the back page, only 4 sentences long. "The search for Catherine Marsh has been called off at the family's request. Mr. William Marsh stated that the family wishes to grieve privately. Authorities have noted no signs of foul play. The matter is considered closed. The family's request." Lauren read that line again. Who calls off a search for their missing child after 1 week? She kept digging. In a box of miscellaneous records at the Historical Society, she found a handwritten letter dated November 1899, addressed to the county sheriff. The letter was from a neighbor of the Marshes, a man named Thomas Ridley. It read, "Sheriff, I write to express concern regarding the Marsh family. Since young Catherine's disappearance, I have observed unusual activity on their property. Lights in the barn at all hours, the sound of digging in the night. 2 days ago, I saw William Marsh carrying something wrapped in cloth toward the back field. It was the size and shape of a child. I do not wish to make accusations, but I believe the matter warrants further investigation." There was no record of a response, no indication that the sheriff had followed up. The letter had simply been filed and forgotten. Lauren made a copy and brought it home. She showed it to Roger that evening. He read it twice, his expression darkening. "You think they buried her? I think they buried something." Roger set the letter down. "Even if that's true, it doesn't explain what's happening now. Doesn't it?" He looked at her. "You think her ghost is opening our basement door?" I think something is down there, Roger, and I think it's been there for over 100 years. That night, Lauren heard the voice again. She was lying in bed, half asleep when it began. Low, indistinct, rising from somewhere beneath the floor. But this time, she could make out words. "Let me out." She sat up, heart pounding. The voice was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Let me out." She shook Roger awake. "Do you hear that?" He listened. "I don't hear anything." "Listen." They sat in silence, and then Roger's expression changed. He heard it. "Let me out." He got out of bed and walked to the hallway. The voice was louder there, emanating from the basement door. He descended the stairs, Lauren following behind him, and stood at the door. The voice was coming from the other side. "Let me out." Roger unlocked the door and opened it. The basement was dark, the single bulb casting weak light across the dirt floor. The voice stopped. They descended together, flashlights in hand, scanning the space. Everything was as it had been. Old shelves, dusty tools, the water heater humming in the corner. But the patch of disturbed dirt in the far corner had grown. It was no longer a small mound. It was a depression, as if something beneath had collapsed inward. And in the center of the depression, barely visible in the dirt, was the outline of a hand. Roger crouched down, shining his light on it. The outline was small, the size of a child's hand. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Lauren knelt beside him. "We need to call someone." "Who? The police? And tell them what?" "That there's something buried in our basement." Roger stood, shaking his head. "We don't know that. This could be—" "What? What could it be, Roger?" He had no answer. They went back upstairs and locked the basement door. Neither of them slept that night. And in the morning, when Lauren went to check the door, she found something that made her blood run cold. Carved into the wood in letters deep enough to feel were 3 words: "You said my name." Comment below. You said my name. If you had found these words carved into your door, would you have stayed? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know if you would have been braver than they were. Lauren called Dr. Ashford immediately. They met at the house that afternoon, and when Dr. Ashford saw the carving on the door, her face went pale. "When did this happen?" "Last night. Or this morning. We don't know." Dr. Ashford ran her fingers over the letters. They were rough, carved with force, but the wood around them was smooth. No splinters, no signs of a blade. It was as if the letters had been burned into the surface. "You need to leave," Dr. Ashford said. "Right now." "We can't just leave," Roger said. "This is our house." "This was never your house. It belongs to whatever is beneath it." Roger's patience snapped. "You're talking about ghosts, spirits. You're an academic, for God's sake. How can you believe this?" Dr. Ashford turned to face him. "Because I've spent 30 years studying the past, and I know when history is trying to warn us. The Marsh family sealed that door for a reason. They carved those names for a reason, and now you've opened it. We sealed it back. It doesn't matter. You broke the threshold, and now it knows you're here." That evening, Dr. Ashford brought 2 colleagues to the house, a structural engineer named David Klein and a forensic anthropologist named Dr. Susan Ortiz. They descended into the basement together, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis tools. What they found confirmed Lauren's fears. The radar showed a hollow space approximately 6 feet below the basement floor, a void consistent with a burial chamber. Dr. Ortiz took soil samples from the disturbed area and noted the presence of decomposed organic material, including fragments that appeared to be bone. "There's something down there," Dr. Ortiz said, "and it's human." They decided to excavate. The work began the following morning. David Klein and his crew carefully removed the dirt in layers, documenting every inch. By midday, they had reached a depth of 4 feet and encountered resistance, something solid beneath the soil. It was another door. This one was smaller, rougher, made of old planks nailed together and sealed with the same black tar-like substance that had covered the exterior door. There was no handle, no hinges. It had been nailed shut from above, and carved into the surface in letters that looked like they had been made with fingernails was a single sentence. She is still listening. David Klein stopped digging. He looked at Dr. Ashford, who stood at the edge of the pit, pale and silent. "Do we open it?" he asked. Dr. Ashford shook her head. "No. We seal this pit and leave." But Roger, standing behind her, said, "We have to know." "You don't," Dr. Ashford said. "Trust me. You don't." But Roger had already made up his mind. He climbed down into the pit, took a crowbar from David's toolbox, and began prying at the edges of the door. Dr. Ashford shouted at him to stop, but he didn't listen. The nails screeched as they came loose, and the tar seal cracked with a sound like breaking teeth. And then the door came free. Beneath it was darkness. A vertical shaft, narrow and deep, descending into earth that looked wet and black. A smell rose from below, not decay, but something older, mineral and cold. Roger shone his flashlight down. The beam reached perhaps 15 feet before the darkness swallowed it, but in that brief moment of illumination he saw something. A face, pale, small, looking up. Roger jerked backward, dropping the flashlight. It tumbled into the shaft, the beam spinning wildly, and then went dark. The pit was silent. "What did you see?" Lauren asked from above. Roger's voice was shaking. "There's someone down there." Dr. Ortiz descended into the pit with a rope and a fresh flashlight. She secured herself and leaned over the shaft, shining the light down. She stayed there for nearly a minute, not moving, not speaking. "What is it?" Dr. Ashford called down. Dr. Ortiz pulled back and looked up. Her face was ashen. "There are bones, small ones, a child." "How far down?" "About 20 feet. But that's not all." She paused. "There's a second set, and a third. They're stacked." The excavation stopped immediately. Dr. Ortiz called the county coroner, and by evening the property was swarming with officials, police, forensic teams, medical examiners. The shaft was carefully excavated over the next 2 days, and what they found confirmed the horror. 3 sets of human remains. All children, all buried vertically, one atop the other, in a shaft that had been dug by hand. The first set of remains were identified through dental records as Catherine Marsh. The second set were never identified. No records matched. The third set belonged to a boy named Michael Oakes, son of Samuel Oakes, the hired hand who disappeared in 1923. Michael had been 8 years old. But there was something else. Each set of remains had been arranged in the same position, sitting upright, hands folded, facing upward, and around each neck was a cord threaded with buttons. Dr. Ortiz examined the buttons under laboratory conditions and found something impossible. The buttons were from different time periods, some from the 1890s, some from the 1920s, and some from the 1940s. But all of them had been worn, touched repeatedly, polished smooth by handling. "These were taken from clothing," Dr. Ortiz said, "removed post-mortem and kept." "Kept by who?" Detective Raymond Cole asked. He was the lead investigator on the case, a methodical man with 20 years of experience. Dr. Ortiz hesitated. "I don't know. But whoever did this wasn't just killing. They were collecting." The investigation expanded. Forensic teams searched the entire property, using radar and cadaver dogs. They found no other remains, but in the barn, they discovered something that changed the trajectory of the case. A journal. It was hidden inside a metal box buried beneath the floorboards. The journal was handwritten, leather-bound, pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was small, precise, meticulous, and it was written by William Marsh. The journal began in 1867, the year the family acquired the property. The early entries were mundane: crop yields, weather reports, financial records. But in 1899, the tone shifted. March 17th, 1899. Catherine has begun to hear it. She woke last night screaming that something was calling her name from beneath the floor. I told her it was only a dream, but I know better. The voice has returned. It has been 20 years since it last spoke, and I had hoped we were free. But it does not forget. April 2nd, 1899. Catherine went into the cellar today. I found her standing over the place where the shaft is sealed. She said the voice is louder there. She said it sounds like a woman. I have forbidden her from going down again, but I fear it will not matter. April 10th, 1899. The voice spoke to me last night. I have not heard it since I was a boy, but I recognized it immediately. It knows our names. It knows what we have done. It wants to be let out. April 18th, 1899. I have decided. It is the only way to keep it silent. Catherine must go down. The voice demands it, and if we do not comply, it will take all of us. I have begun to dig. The entries ended there. The rest of the journal was blank. Detective Cole read the entire journal 3 times. Then he issued an order to exhume the family cemetery on the property. The cemetery was located at the edge of the Marsh property, overgrown and forgotten. There were 6 graves, marked by simple stones. 4 belonged to members of the Marsh family. 2 were unmarked. Forensic teams exhumed all 6 graves. The first 4 contained remains consistent with the records: William Marsh, his wife Helen, and their 2 sons. But the 2 unmarked graves were empty, completely empty. The graves had been dug, the coffins lowered, but nothing had been placed inside. They were decoys, monuments to something that was never buried. Detective Cole stood at the edge of the empty graves trying to piece together the logic. Why dig graves for people who aren't dead? Dr. Ashford, who had been consulting on the case, had a theory. Because they were trying to convince something that they were. Convince what? Whatever is listening. The investigation turned to the shaft itself. Structural engineers descended into the excavation with ropes and lights, mapping the passage. It was deep, nearly 30 feet, and at the bottom they found a chamber. The chamber was small, circular, carved directly into bedrock. The walls were smooth, as if polished by hand, and in the center of the floor was a single object, a wooden chair. It was identical to the chair they had found in the first chamber, high-backed, smooth, worn by touch, but this chair had no names carved into it. Instead, carved into the floor around the chair, in letters nearly 6 inches tall, was a sentence: "If you sit, you will hear." The engineering team photographed everything and refused to go further. One of them, a man named Eric Cross, later told investigators that the moment he read that sentence, he felt what he described as a pull, an urge to sit in the chair that was so strong he had to physically restrain himself. "It wasn't my thought," he said. "It felt like someone else's idea in my head." Detective Cole ordered the chamber sealed. Concrete was poured into the shaft, filling it completely, and the basement floor was reinforced with steel and an additional 2 feet of concrete. The door leading to the basement was removed and replaced with a solid wall. The Tate family moved out the following week. They sold the property at a loss to a developer who promised to demolish the house and build new construction. But the sale fell through when the developer's crew refused to work on the site. 3 separate construction teams visited the property, and all 3 left within hours, citing unsafe conditions that none of them could articulate. The house has stood empty ever since, but the story does not end there. In the months following the investigation, several people connected to the case reported strange experiences. Detective Cole began hearing whispers in his home at night, always the same phrase, repeated over and over. "You said my name." Dr. Ortiz found buttons scattered across her office floor, though she had locked the door and no one had entered. And Roger Tate, who had insisted on opening the second door, began to see a figure standing in his bedroom at night, small, pale, always facing away. He checked himself into a psychiatric facility in June of 1998. He was released 3 months later, but refused to speak about what he had seen. Lauren Tate, however, did speak. She gave an interview to a local reporter in December of 1998, and her account was published in the Cooperstown Ledger under the headline, "The House That Listens." In the interview, Lauren described the final night they spent in the house, the night before they moved out. She said she woke at 3:17 a.m. and saw a child standing at the foot of her bed. The child was small, no older than 10, with pale skin and hollow eyes. It did not move, it did not speak, it simply stared. And then, Lauren said, it smiled. It wasn't a human smile, Lauren told the reporter. It was something imitating a smile, like it had learned the expression but didn't understand what it meant. The child stood there for nearly a minute, Lauren frozen in terror, unable to move or scream. And then it turned and walked toward the bedroom door. It did not open the door. It walked through it as if the wood were not there. Lauren and Roger left at dawn and never returned. The property remains undeveloped. The house still stands, though the windows are boarded and the doors are chained. Local teenagers occasionally dare each other to approach it at night, but few make it past the driveway. Those who do report the same experience. A voice, faint but distinct, calling their name from inside the house. In 2003, a paranormal investigation team requested permission to enter the property. The request was denied by the county, citing safety concerns. But 2 members of the team entered anyway, breaking through a boarded window on the ground floor. They were found 6 hours later, sitting in their van in the driveway, unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, both men were conscious but refused to speak. One of them was holding a button. Brass, old, worn smooth by handling. He would not let it go. Dr. Ashford continued her research for 3 more years, compiling every record, every letter, every newspaper clipping related to the Marsh family. In 2001, she published a paper titled Thresholds of Silence, Burial Practices and Psychological Manipulation in Rural Pennsylvania, 1867-1950. The paper made no mention of the supernatural. It focused instead on the sociology of fear, the way isolated communities create rituals to contain what they cannot understand. But in the final paragraph, Dr. Ashford wrote something that her colleagues found unusual. There are places where history does not rest, where the past remains active, waiting not for discovery but for recognition. The Marsh property is one such place. What was buried there was not merely bodies, but a belief, a conviction so strong that it shaped the land itself. And belief, once embedded in soil and stone, does not fade. It listens, it remembers, and it responds to those who speak its name. The paper was published in a small academic journal and largely ignored. Dr. Ashford retired the following year. She moved to Vermont and never spoke publicly about the case again. But those who knew her said she kept a journal, locked in a desk drawer, that she wrote in every night. When she died in 2019, her family found the journal and burned it, unread, as per her instructions. Detective Cole closed the case in 1999, listing the deaths of Catherine Marsh, Michael Oakes, and the unidentified child as historical homicides with the primary suspect deceased. He noted in his report that the mechanism of death could not be conclusively determined and recommended that the property remain sealed indefinitely. He retired in 2005. In his final interview with the department, a colleague asked him if he believed the stories about the house, the voices, the apparitions, the sense that something was still there. Cole thought for a long time before answering. "I believe," he said slowly, "that some doors were never meant to be opened. Not because of what's behind them, but because opening them changes the person who does it. That house changed everyone who entered it. It made us see something we weren't ready to see. And now we carry it with us." "Do you still hear it?" the colleague asked. Cole looked out the window. "Every night." Lauren Tate never recovered from the experience. She and Roger divorced in 2000. She moved west to Oregon and tried to rebuild her life, but she could not escape the memory. In a letter written to Dr. Ashford in 2004, Lauren described what she believed had happened. "I don't think we found something evil in that house. I think we found something that was made evil, by isolation, by fear, by the weight of being forgotten. The Marsh family didn't bury their children to protect themselves. They buried them to keep something quiet. And whatever that thing was, it learned. It learned names, it learned faces, it learned how to make people come to it. And I think it's still learning." Lauren Tate died in 2017, in a small apartment in Portland. She lived alone. Her neighbors reported that in the weeks before her death, they heard her talking to someone late at night, long, one-sided conversations that sounded like she was pleading. When her body was found, the apartment was empty except for one thing: a wooden chair, high-backed and smooth, sitting in the center of the living room. No one knew where it had come from. The chair was removed by the estate sale company and donated to a thrift store. It sold 3 days later. The buyer's name was not recorded. The Marsh property remains sealed. The house still stands, slowly decaying, overtaken by vines and rot. The town has discussed demolition multiple times, but every proposal has been quietly shelved. No official reason is given, but those who live nearby understand. Some places are not meant to be disturbed. On certain nights when the wind is still and the air is cold, people driving past the property report seeing a light in one of the upstairs windows. It's faint, like candlelight, and it moves, slowly, from room to room, as if someone is walking through the house. No one has lived there since 1998, and yet, the light continues. In 2018, a historian named Marcus Delaney attempted to access the county archives to research the Marsh case for a book he was writing. He was denied access. When he pressed the issue, citing public records law, the county clerk told him that the files had been misplaced during a reorganization. Delaney filed a Freedom of Information request. It was denied on the grounds of ongoing investigation. When Delaney pointed out that the case had been closed for nearly 20 years, the county attorney responded with a single sentence: "Some investigations are never truly closed." Delaney abandoned the project, but the story does not end. Because in the years since the Marsh house was sealed, something has spread. Quietly. Subtly. People who have heard the story, who have read about it, researched it, spoken about it, report similar experiences. Voices at night, figures in doorways, the sensation of being watched from below, and buttons. Always, the buttons. They appear in pockets, on nightstands, in the corners of rooms. Old buttons, worn buttons. Buttons that no one remembers owning. And when people pick them up, they feel it. A pull, faint but undeniable, towards something they cannot name. Dr. Ashford understood this in her final years. She wrote about it in the journal her family burned. One passage, transcribed by a colleague who read it before the burning, contained this line: "It does not need the house. The house was only the beginning. It needed us to know it was there. And now that we do, it can reach farther." Every name spoken, every story told, every person who wonders if it's real, they become a doorway. And doorways, once opened, can never be fully closed. The colleague who transcribed that passage refused to say more. But she did confirm one thing. Dr. Ashford, in her final weeks, began collecting buttons. She kept them in a jar by her bedside. When she died, the jar contained over 300. No one knows where they came from. The Marsh property is still there. The door is still sealed. The ground is still undisturbed. But if you visit the site, if you stand in the driveway and listen, you will hear it. A voice. Faint. Persistent. Rising from beneath the earth. It does not speak words. Not exactly. But you will understand what it wants. It wants you to say the name. And if you do, if you speak the name of Catherine Marsh, or Samuel Oakes, or Edith Marsh, it will hear you. No matter where you are, no matter how far you run. Because the threshold was never in the house. It was always in the knowing. If you've watched this far, it's because you felt something shift while hearing this story. A quiet recognition that some histories don't end, they only wait. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far, so I can meet you," the ones who aren't afraid to look into the dark and acknowledge what looks back. Subscribe to this channel because the past is not a graveyard, it's a living archive, and every story here honors the voices that were silenced too soon. Share this video with someone who understands that the most terrifying truths are the ones we inherit. And like this video if you believe that some doors should remain closed, not because we fear what's behind them, but because we finally understand what they protect us from. The Marsh house is still standing, and it is still listening.